And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, you've heard this passage probably all your life from Luke's gospel, and especially if you consider yourself a Southern woman. Now, let me let you know off the bat, this text is not just for women, but for whatever reason, women, I think, have been pressured to say whether or not they're a Mary or they're a Martha. You know, you get asked that question. You go to Bible study when this is read, and I think I'm more of a Mary or a Martha. What are you? And then they chat about that. Well, this text is not designed to be just towards women. So men, if you thought you could take a snooze during this time, you're on the hook. You have to stay awake and listen too. It's for all of us. Luke's not a sexist. In fact, if you read Luke's gospel, he, of all the four evangelists, has the highest view of women. Luke mentions women more than anyone else in terms of their role as disciples. If you read Acts, even, whoever wrote Luke, historically Luke also wrote Acts, and he actually mentions a woman named Junia, who was numbered among the apostles. Interesting, right? Luke is very pro-women, so don't see this as a way of putting women down or saying women have their place only in the kitchen. That still comes from time to time. I hear that sort of language, and that's simply not true. But what's going on here? You have these two women in this case, Mary and Martha, who have received Jesus and the disciples into their home. By the way, there are 6 Marys mentioned, at least 6. We think there are 6 distinct Marys in the New Testament. So this is not Mary, the mother of Jesus. This is not Mary Magdalene. This is Mary of Bethany. Their brother, Mary and Martha's brother, was Lazarus, who, by the way, is not mentioned in Luke's gospel. He's only mentioned in John's gospel. But they've received Jesus and the disciples into their home, and this is exactly what Jesus talked about in the chapter prior. He said, as they go out, there are people who receive them and will serve them and bring them into their home. And for those that do, they'll stay and teach and be served for the time that they're there. And for those who do not receive them, Jesus says, shake the dust off your boots and go to the next home. So interestingly enough, Mary and Martha are doing exactly what the Lord predicted, that folks would in fact receive them and offer them hospitality. So as Jesus comes in, it's his custom he would sit to teach. That was a Jewish rabbinical practice. The rabbis would sit to teach. And of course, the disciples would crowd around and sit right at his feet. Makes me think of high school. You know, the nerdiest kids always sat on the front row. And maybe it's because they couldn't see the board, but I think it's oftentimes because they wanted to learn. And that's why their grades were usually the best. I think over the years, I slowly started sitting further and further back in the classroom, and my grades consequently dwindled. But you see Mary sitting on the front row here. She doesn't want to waste any time. She wants to be right at Jesus' feet, to hear the message right from his mouth. Maybe she was a nerd. Maybe she couldn't see well, but I think more than anything else, she knew who this person was. In fact, Martha calls him Lord, but Mary was there to receive a message from him. So as time goes on, Martha's in the kitchen, as it seems, carrying on her tasks. She comes complaining. She says, Lord, talking to Jesus, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Jesus responds. He says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Well, what is he talking about? You know, Jesus, somebody's got to do the dishes. They're just going to pile up if someone doesn't do it. Somebody's got to cook. Someone's got to clean. Someone's got to do all of this. And Jesus knew that because Jesus said, we will go into people's homes and they will serve us. And yet Martha comes complaining. And this is a snapshot. I talked about this last week when we looked at the gospel. This is a snapshot of everything St. Paul is talking about in his letters. The distinction between being justified by faith and being justified by our own works. And I think Martha is here coming to justify herself, saying, look how amazing I am. I'm doing the dishes. And I think Jesus recognizes the good in that, but he will not recognize the self-justification project. He says, Mary has chosen the better part. You see, Mary was justified by faith here. She sits and receives. There's nothing left to be done. Yes, the dishes have to be done, but those can wait. It's time to rest and receive. Now, maybe I'm reading St. Paul into this text, but I don't think so, because Luke would have been well acquainted with that message of justification. And I think he saw it right before his own eyes. And we see it before our own eyes too, don't we? We know when people are trying to prove themselves. We know when we ourselves are trying to prove ourselves and make ourselves to be something that perhaps is true, but probably is more than we actually are. And it still goes to say, right, the task had to be done. Somebody had to do the work. So Martha's not doing a bad thing. And Jesus, throughout his ministry, says to serve and love one another. Martha's doing that, isn't she? She's doing exactly what she's supposed to do. And yet still seems not to be enough. It's never enough. If only she was able to rest and receive as well. We would often have in New York dinner parties that we would host, but also go into other people's homes. And we went to a good friend of ours pretty routinely. And this couple would have us over. They had 2 young children. And the food was always out of this world. But having 2 young children, the house was a bit of a mess. There was stuff out of order. And by the end of the meal, they weren't quick to get up and do the dishes. They would just let them sit. From the outside looking in, you would say, these people are disgusting. What is wrong with them? But as you sat there, you realized that they were trying to keep the conversation going as long as possible. To get up and do the dishes was a way to cut it off, which sometimes you have to do, right? But they didn't do that. And the conversations were always good. We always stayed way too late. Sometimes one of them had to sneak away to put the kids away, and we would carry on, still talking, still having a good time. I think it was the woman's way of knowing that the husband and I would do the dishes after the fact, and we always did. And that's no way to boast on my part. It was a fun time for me, too, just to hang out with him a little longer. To do the dishes with him was a joy. The point is, though, like I said, from the outside looking in, this seemed improper. It seemed lazy. It seemed kind of disgusting. The point is, those tasks could wait. Sometimes tasks cannot wait, but these tasks could wait. Have you ever been in someone's presence like that, where you felt like their attention was fully on you, or yours was on them? You didn't have somewhere else to be. You didn't have something else to do. You were fully invested in what was going on there. That happens from time to time, but it seems to be rarer and rarer in our world. We're attached to our devices. I insist upon not getting one of those fancy watches that some of you have, because I just couldn't stand being tethered to something like that. But who am I kidding? I'm tethered to my phone. I look every 10 seconds to see if I've got a notification, and not something important like an email from one of you or a call, but I'm looking at my YouTube channel or my podcast app or what have it be, something completely unimportant, and yet I'm fully enslaved to it. And it's an awful thing. But it's easy in this world to be distracted. You know, Martha was distracted by good things, things that needed to be done, things that were for the sake of the neighbor, to serve one another. And yet they still distract us. Things distract us. And whether it's your smartphone for you, and I imagine for 80% of you, it's definitely your smartphone, or your dumb phone. Those things can be distracting too. But for most of us, it's our jobs, isn't it? It's the things that we do from 9 to 5 that really, really burden us and keep us tethered to that. We're worried about our work. We're worried about the things that are good. Again, to provide for our family, for ourselves, to be good citizens, we have to contribute. And yet our jobs ultimately become an idol. They're a placeholder for the things that we do, to keep our wheels turning so that we look busy and important. And gosh, I can't think of any other way other than to sit and rest. That's the only alternative, is to sit and rest. And you're saying, well, Jay, these things have to be done. Yes, they do have to be done. And yet sometimes they can wait. I like reading biographies of pastors and particularly autobiographies to get their own perspective on things. And a guy named Eugene Peterson wrote one a few years ago before his death. And he talks about a time in his life where he was so wedded to his work as a pastor. And I think it's a good work. I mean, I've made a living of it, haven't I? But even we can make a spiritual task, which is a good thing, our end-all, be-all, serving the church, making ourselves look really important. Well, at this season of his life, the church was running him like a dog, or he was letting them run him. And so he was having dinner, or about to sit down to dinner with his daughter, and he got a call from one of the church vestry members. So he made his way. They had a meeting that they had called. And as he was on his way out the door, his daughter stopped him and says, "Dad, this is the 43rd consecutive night that you have not had dinner with me?" Of course, his heart sunk. 43, she's been counting. It's been over a month. Well, he went on his way anyways. You thought that would stop him, but he still was wedded, still tethered to that need to be important, that need to be the one who is in charge, the one in control. And he gets there, and of course he's in a terrible mood. And finally the vestry asks him, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so upset?" Pardon my language, but this is what he said. He says, "I have to run this damn church." And they said, "No, you don't. No, you don't. That's what we're for." He learned a lesson that night. He went back home. He left the meeting early. They allowed him to go. And he learned, I'm not as important as I think I am. I'm not as in control as I think I am. And all this time, the one who's been paying the price is my daughter, who I haven't had dinner with for 43 consecutive nights. Now, I'm thankful that you all free me up to have dinner with my son and my wife. You're not running me like a dog. But times happen, things happen, and sometimes you do have to be on duty, so to speak. But you can see the two extremes there, right? One of being Johnny on the spot, which is a good thing, and the other of never being with your family, never being with your loved ones. Perhaps you can relate to that in your own work life. And maybe it's not just family, but there's some other part of your life that's being neglected. More than likely, you're being distracted, and something is being left neglected. And more than likely, it is someone, not so much something, but it could be something. One of my friends talks about this in our golf game, which is not very good. He says, "Jay, you really have three canisters. You've got your tee shots, you've got your fairway shots, and you've got your short game." He says, "You've only got so much sand, though, to fill those three canisters. If you start working on one, the other one starts to go down. You start working on this one, and that one starts to dwindle. You've only got so many resources. So you have to work on what's important and what really matters." Similarly, with you and me, we've only got so many hours in the day. We've only got so much time to devote to the task before us. And so unlike Martha in this case, I think the call is to see that Mary has chosen the better part. She's putting the sand in the canister that really matters. And yes, other things will dwindle. The dishes will rise. Yes, things will be a wreck in other parts of your life, but the things that really matter, the things that are put in perspective and you see that have eternal consequences, that's where we're called to put our sand. I'm not saying all this to put a burden on you, to go and do a checklist of your life and say, "Gosh, how can I do better?" It's not a checklist. It's not a report card. It's not a grading aspect of your life. But it is a call for you to see what really matters. And sometimes the dishes do matter. But usually they don't. It's just that need to have our ego showing forth, to have maintenance over our lives. And I guess it's easy for me to say I've got a young child. It's all the maintenance of my life's off. Every suit that I own needs to be dry cleaned. Everything that I own is just, it's not in good shape. So I can get up here and fake it and say, "Oh, I'm really spiritual. I've let those things go for the sake of God and His Word." But that's not true either, because as much as He's tugging on my leg to play ball with Him, I can find something more important to do every once in a while. So I'm going to let that sit for you in your life to decide what things require your attention. But this morning you may be fidgeting too. You may already feel the call on your wrist or in your pocket. Your phone is already buzzing. You've got emails waiting for you. You've got people waiting for you. And I hope for this 1 hour of your life, those things can sit. And maybe you're so addicted to it, the distractions of your life. Maybe this one sermon's not going to fix you. But maybe for just a brief moment, for one brief moment, you can empty your hands of the smartphone. You can empty your hands of all the things that need to be done. And you can follow in Mary's footsteps and sit and be mindful of the one thing needful, which is Jesus and His love for you, which, as Luke says here, as Jesus says, it will not be taken away from you. So as you come to this rail with empty hands, they're going to be filled with something that's very, 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 very important, much more important than whatever notification is waiting for you on the other side. For that brief moment, you thrust your arms into eternity, and God puts Himself in your hands. He inserts Himself into your life as you've been inserted into His. As the prayer book says, that we may dwell in Him and He in us. Maybe, just maybe, for these brief few moments, you can taste and see that the Lord is good. And then, yes, get back to your smartphones when you need to. They do need to have some attention at some point. These distractions are, in fact, worthy at some point, but not right now. So as you come to this altar this morning, be thankful that the crucified and resurrected Lord is here with you. He's meeting you right where you are. Despite all your distractions, He's here. And He's got that same word that He's had from the very beginning. He loves you, and He forgives you, and He's for you. Amen.